Even as Putin's trip to India is materializing and a lot of things are happening around it, there has been a big change in United States approach towards NATO. There is a meeting going on in Brussels, and there's a lot of stuff that has happened in the last 48 hours from the time Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner met personally with Putin to get us all the things and also to connect between the dots. We have with us Utsav Chakrabarti. Utsav, namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel. How are you, sir?
Namaste, Shri, and I'm happy to be back. I'm doing good.
So, Utsav, take us back a few days. See, what happened was there was a deadline given, 27th November, if I remember correctly, by Trump saying that if you don't sign by this time, if you don't agree, that was the 28-point formula, then basically Trump said to Ukraine, you are on your own. And I think that was also to the NATO. So talk to us a little bit about what happened since then, the 28-point, then NATO comes up with the 24-point something. And then I think there was some agreement on 19 of the 28 things when Putin and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner met. But there is something beyond all this happening. Talk to us about what's going on.
Absolutely. So there is something very, very serious happening right now, and we will try to deconstruct it. We'll try to demystify ourselves using what we know, but there is something really tectonically path-breaking that is happening right now, and we need to figure out what it is exactly. But just to take you back a few days, so as you mentioned, there was the deadline of 27th of November. Actually, none of the sides could agree on exactly what was going to be accepted. There were two main groups of issues that we are dealing with here, and our audience, both in America and as well as those around the world who are listening to us, need to understand there are two sets of objectives that both sides want to fulfill. One is the short-term objective of what is currently happening in the war, which is the territories, the Russian versus Ukrainian, the cultural, the Azovs and the neo-Nazis, as the Russians would call them. So that's what's happening in the theater of the battle. And there are a set of points that both sides want on that. The Russian side obviously wants to keep everything that they have conquered. They want to empty out Donetsk, which is the region that is still not fully conquered, but there are two major cities, Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, that they are looking to conquer. They still want to conquer Kupiansk, which they have kind of half conquered. So those are all listed in the Russian demand. They need to have those places. Obviously, Ukraine was more than willing to consider those points, even though they have not said anything publicly. But they're more than willing to consider those points as part of the negotiations. They are open to accepting some of those things. There are other points that are more strategic in nature and that are more long-term in nature that both sides cannot agree on. In those points are three main points. One is whether Ukraine gets to join the NATO. NATO wants Ukraine to join NATO. Ukraine wants to join NATO, but that's a red line that Russia will not allow to cross. In fact, one of the reasons why this war is happening is because Russia doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO and have the balance of power between NATO versus Russia shift all the way to Kiev. Which is something that is a red line for them for the longest, at least for the last 20, 25 years, more than that, 30 years, I would say. So that is one point of contention. The other point of contention, Ukraine is even willing to let go of that to some degree. In fact, I have seen a lot of reports saying that America has fully accepted that Ukraine will not join NATO. Many European powers have accepted, even though they keep bringing it up again. They are willing to let go of that. What they are not willing to let go of are the two major points, which are strategic and long-term in nature. One is the security guarantees. So what NATO has done in dealing with Russia in these negotiations is that NATO has said, fine, Ukraine will not join NATO, but we will have forces in Ukraine that will be guaranteeing security to Ukraine on behalf of NATO. And the way the Russians interpret that is, well, that is Ukraine joining NATO. So there is that semantics involved, and that is where one of the point of contentions are. The other thing is the number of soldiers or war fighters that Ukraine can keep. So back in 2022, when there was negotiations in Istanbul between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine had technically given agreement that they will keep their army. Technically, they never followed through. Obviously, the war continued. We know the story about how it continued with Boris Johnson and all these people visiting. Ukraine had agreed that they will have less than 300,000 soldiers back in 2022. Now Ukraine and NATO are saying that ideally we would want it to be 800,000, but if we are feeling very generous, we will agree to 600,000. And Russia is like, no, that's not acceptable to us. We still want it to be less than 300,000. Russia might give in if it is 400,000 at most. So those are the three main points, which are long-term in nature, which are strategic in nature. That's where the differences are, and that has been the main contention of arguments and so on and so forth. Now, coming back to what happened in the last 4 or 5 days. On December 2nd, there was a 4 to 5 hour meeting in Kremlin between Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's envoy, and seems like he's earned his trust so far. Jared Kushner, this is the important point. Jared Kushner is considered to be one of Trump's closest advisors and somebody who Trump really trusts more than anybody else in the cabinet. And Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were part of this meeting at the Kremlin for about 4 or 5 hours. They were supposed to get out of that meeting, fly from there to Brussels in Belgium, where our ally Volodymyr Zelensky was waiting. And he was supposed to have met these two and discussed further peace negotiations and further plans. Now, what happened was, and this is something that is very interesting, these guys left the Kremlin, as in Witkoff and Kushner, after the meeting. They never did a press conference. They, in fact, ran away from the press, like they avoided the press. The Russians, Ushakov, I believe, from Kremlin's negotiation team came out and said that agreements have not been reached. And he gave a very, very terse, and he said, there are big points of contentions. And then they flew to the airport, took the plane, and within 5 minutes of the plane taking flight, they informed Brussels without any formal memo, without any formal messaging, that they are not going to be meeting Zelensky in Brussels, and they flew straight to the US. Now, that is something very unique. That has not happened in many months. I think we can compare this incident to the snub that Zelensky received back when Trump came to power and he did his first press conference where he got into this huge argument with Vice President Vance in public, and Vance berated. It's that level of snub, I believe. But the unique part about this conversation is that it is a snub not just to Zelensky, but to the entire NATO. So that's why I believe that your topic of this conversation is beginning to look very justified in its content.
Thank you so much. So not only that, in the Brussels meeting, I think that commenced yesterday, normally the Secretary of State from the United States would be representing United States. This time, Rubio has stayed away from that. Are these two connected?
Absolutely. The fact that on 3rd December, Zelensky was left waiting there on his table in the meeting room, and the flight just diverted itself within 10 minutes of taking flight without any further communication, is very much connected to Secretary of State Marco Rubio not being in Brussels as they meet now. I mean, they met yesterday, they were meeting today. So there is something very serious in this conversation. Now we don't know what's happening. But I have a feeling that in the 4 hours of meeting that happened in Kremlin, there could have been some serious conversations on strategic issues that are vulnerabilities that the US was not aware of, that NATO was not aware of, that were brought to the table or discussed. There could have been some serious intelligence information, voice recordings, something of sorts, that really put a spanner in the conversation, and that put the American team in a very, very bad place. So I have a feeling that could have been one of the reasons where some intelligence evidence was shown which derailed this conversation completely. And in my opinion, it makes the Europeans look in a very, very weak position at this point right now.
So just expand us a little bit. Conversation between whom?
Conversation between Russian negotiators, as in Kremlin, which included Putin in the room.
Oh, Putin.
And Putin was there. And as well as with the American representatives between Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. So that I believe was something seriously was shared, conversed on, that really changed the understanding that the Americans had of the ground realities and possibly where the future is heading towards.
Now, let's try and connect the dots here a little bit. See, if anything, if something serious got exchanged between US and Russia, it's the NATO that should be jumping up and down. That how dare this happened or something. NATO is deathly quiet, and on the other hand, US is making all the moves. So I'm going to come to the economic point of view for US in just a minute, but let's try to fix this part. What do you think is happening?
In my opinion, I think what is happening is that there is a greater realization within America, within our thought leadership, especially within President Trump's team, that there has been an inability from the side of America to bring an end to this war in the best terms possible for the West and Ukraine. Russia continues to double down on its position on the outcomes of its war. And as the war proceeds, we did site trips on what was happening on the ground 2 weeks ago, and I believe that trend has continued. Russia continues to gain ground. Russia continues to bleed the Ukrainian manpower to the point where it has become quite ineffective in some parts. And despite provocations from NATO and Ukraine in terms of blowing up some of the Russian fleet, the civilian fleets that was transferring oil and fertilizers and a bunch of other things in the Black Sea, I think the Russians have drawn new red lines, which might include getting the city of Odessa. And given the current status, I think our administration in Washington, D.C. is eager to end the war as quickly as possible so that 100 years from now, President Trump is not accused of looking like Napoleon Bonaparte at the Battle of Borodino when historians look back at history. So I think President Trump genuinely believes that he doesn't want to own this war if it ends in a defeat for NATO and the West. And he would rather want to end this war earlier on better terms than have it reach it seems like a logical end, which is going to be a pure Russian victory. So I think that is something that is driving America's position in this war. I think that is something I believe President Trump is being very wise in trying to end this quickly. Now, in terms of Europeans and other NATO states, I think there is a division. There are some countries in Europe, especially Poland, Germany, France, and UK, who are interested to continue this. It is and the larger leadership of EU, which is a bureaucratic apparatus sitting on top of everybody else, because it makes them relevant. It keeps them going. I think countries like Italy, countries like Romania, even the smaller Eastern European countries, the Czech Republic, the Slovaks, Hungary, for sure, don't want this war to continue any further. So there is division within NATO, and I think that's what is happening right now.
So play this thing out a little bit. So why is US now not willing to supply arms and financial aid anymore to Ukraine in the light of the revelations that his chief of staff, Aramco or something like that, Aramco, something like that. Anyway, I'm getting the name wrong, I'm sure. Zelensky's chief of staff has resigned because it's believed that he wasn't even conveying some of the decisions that were being taken by Zelensky to the rest of the people for implementation. So what is that twist here?
So I think that is an afterthought. I think he was doing what he was doing. He was one of the key advisors of Zelensky. He was one of the biggest proponents of this war and executors of he was a successful executor of this entire NATO-Ukrainian alliance for the last 4 years. They have done a fantastic job, to be honest, how well they integrated NATO's supply chain into Ukraine's war effort. But he was also one of the biggest hawks on this conflict. He wanted this war to continue, and he was pushing Zelensky to continue to push this war forward. What happened was that now America is not interested to continue this war. It wants to end this war, and I believe Trump is right in wanting to end it from his perspective. So what he did was, the United States needed to cut Zelensky and his closer aides who are pro-war, cut them down to size. And everybody knew that there is a lot of corruption in Ukraine. Everybody knew that. It has been there for the last 20 years. And
Right.
they just brought out what was known to everybody and put some real cases on this gentleman, making Yermak. His name is Yermak. And,
Yermak,
and
correct.
yeah, and basically cut him down to size, making him, answer to the things that he was committing, and everybody knew he was committing. They just held him more accountable so that he comes under pressure and is forced to resign, and which in turn weakens Vladimir Zelensky, because he was Zelensky's close aide. Now there is going to be a meeting happening in Miami with the other next closest person that Zelensky has, which is Umarov. Rustam Umarov. He's a Ukrainian Tatar, from Turkish Muslim origin. And Rustam Umarov is meeting American leaders in Miami in the next couple of days. So there is still a channel of communication open with Zelensky. But Yermak is out.
Okay, so let's now address the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Why does US want to quit? So one of the stories that John Meisheimer has been mentioning is that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, needs to find $3 trillion, and he needs to find it quickly. And $3 trillion is not something that you can magically produce out of thin air. So it looks like US suddenly is realizing that it has run out of cash, or it is fast running out of cash. So given that situation, I don't think US is going to spend even a dime on Ukraine anymore. How do you see the ground situation now?
So yeah, you are absolutely right. The US has no more interest in bankrolling any further conflict in there. With the US pulling out of real substantial support, which is substantial, I must say, to Ukraine. Like, Ukrainian army literally lives off of Ukrainians, American support, whether it is the intelligence information, satellite imagery, command and control structure, even some of the missile launches are guided from American leadership. If that stops, then I think Ukraine will have a significant disadvantage in the battle space. There will be even lesser morale amongst the Ukrainian war fighters, which means there will be far more desertions, there will be far more surrenders in the place where the conflict is actually happening. Then the winter is setting in. So because winter is setting in and Ukrainian infrastructure has been taken out very regularly by the Russian missile strikes, there will be less civilian support from Americans to the Ukrainians in terms of replenishing their transformer, electrical grid, equipment and stuff like that. So I think Ukraine will agree to a far more friendlier term of ending this conflict with Russia. Now again, it depends how much the Europeans, especially UK, Germany and France, are willing to make up for the lack of American support. I believe they don't have the resources or the military abilities to do it, but I think they might try, especially UK.
Two of those three countries that you mentioned are actually seeking bailout from the IMF, though they don't want to admit it. France and UK.
When has that stopped them from making war decisions? That has been the trend for a while. I mean, wars keep people distracted, and sometimes that works. So I think that they will still continue to push for more conflict in that area.
Well, lot of questions, not many answers, but clearly United States has drawn its own red line, and we have to wait and see. See, usually what happens is when they are pushed against the wall, NATO will also bend a little bit. But here, I think it is very clear. US says no more money from us, no more support. He hasn't said that, but he basically said you're on your own. And that was on the 27th of November. The deadline came and went. So if let's say US walks out from this, or walks away from this whole thing, what happens to Trump's popularity and chances of, would Trump's popularity rise in United States? Because at the end of the day, that's all everybody's looking at.
So I believe so. I think there is a big segment of population in the United States, especially among Trump's supporters, who genuinely didn't want war with Ukraine, with Russia. I mean, this is a war, proxy war, right? This is Americans and NATO forces literally fighting Russia in the battle space of Ukraine. A lot of Trump supporters don't want that. Trump himself made multiple pronunciations during his election campaign, including the infamous, I would have ended that war in 24 hours. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of people, Trump can go back to that promise or a modified version of that promise and say that, look, I did the best I could, and this is the best I could get out of this for peace. So at multiple levels, I think Americans, especially Trump supporters, would be happy if this war ends in the way it is ending. I think what President Trump fears the most is, which is what I said before, he doesn't want to be remembered 100 years from now in YouTube history videos as Napoleon is remembered for the Battle of Borodino. Because if this war continues, and it continues till the end of President Trump's term, he will be the one owning this war, which most likely will lead to NATO's defeat.
Yes, very true. So we have a few questions from our viewers, so let's just take a look at those, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Karnavati wants to know, do you see this potential peace deal could fall through since Europeans are not interested in it?
I do believe it can fall through. I think it will. There will be multiple hiccups in the process, and there could be multiple scenarios that might emerge from these hiccups. There could be escalations in the short term, 1 month, 2 month escalation. There could be, there could be growing areas of conflict. There could be attacks on Black Sea fleet, on Black Sea shipping. There could be attacks on Baltic shipping. There could be attacks on Western countries and tit for tat. So there could be a short term or medium term escalation before this finally reaches a conclusion. But the general trend of the conflict has been more or less stable, which is that NATO will come out weaker, Ukraine will come out as a loser, and Russia, most likely with a lot of bleeding and a lot of suffering, will come out victorious at the end of it.
It's a Pyrrhic victory, is what you're saying, for Russia.
It is going to be a Pyrrhic victory for Russia, but I think that's where it's heading.
Viewers, Pyrrhic means victory that comes at great cost. That's what it means. Usually it's associated with military campaign. That's why I use that word. Milin wants to know, is Zelensky in contact with Modi ji covertly?
I'm sure that there is communication between Ukrainian intelligence and Indian intelligence and proxies that are connected to the prime minister's and the president's office on both sides. It is inevitable because India has been a key actor in Russia's ability to continue this war. So there is no reason why Ukrainian leadership will not try to have some level of communication with Prime Minister's office in India. I don't know whether they're talking to each other. I don't believe they're talking to each other directly, but certainly there are people between them who are very close to each of their leadership that are talking to each other.
Thank you so much, Utsav, and thanks again for coming at such short notice to give us an update on this. Viewers, this is beginning to have some sort of a direction towards some kind of an ending. Let's wait and see. And I think what you're saying is spot on. Trump needs to end it now so that at least he has 8-9 months to show that because of this, the economy has turned around in US. Because the easiest thing to do is to print more money. But if you're printing money and if you're also bleeding that money in a cause that is not winning you anything, it's absolutely stupid. So this is the point, viewers. US has to print money. I told you, right? 3 trillion is what Scott Bessent is looking for. Where is he going to get it? You can only go and print more money. But you want to at least show the US people that, look, we have cut all our other things. We are not bleeding anymore. And perhaps even an enhanced ICE raids. I think today ICE raids are happening in Minnesota. That scandal of freedom for future something, feeding our future or something like that, 1 billion and more. Amazingly, the name of Ilhan Omar is not there in that, which completely amazes me. No Tim Walz, no Ilhan Omar, and yet 1 billion has gone missing. What kind of stuff is going on, guys?
It comes back to Ilhan Omar through election donations. You don't have to be part of it. You can get donations during your re-elections. Yeah.
That's true too. So thank you once again, Utsav. And viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. Namaskar.
Namaste, everybody.